It is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Realtime with Rukshan. Today's discussion is on the state of emergency in Victoria, Australia. And although I'll be touching on the extension of the state of emergency powers, which was passed in Parliament a few nights ago, this episode is really more about the actual state of emergency that we are going through in Victoria. And also in other parts of the world, many people can relate to what is going on in Victoria. Now, the emergency that I'm discussing is the erosion of our rights, our freedoms, our civil liberties, and most importantly, our voice as a community. And that could come in many different forms. So when someone says community, many people assume that, you are trying to represent everyone's voice. And that is not the case. There are a lot of different people with different perspectives living within our community. And they make up smaller and smaller parts of the larger community as a whole. But what we have come to accept in Western democracies is that all these smaller communities have a right to have their voices heard. So this is not about measuring who speaks for who. This is really about the ability of any community to get up there and have their voices heard. Now, what's happening right now is that the community of citizens, constituents, people, whatever you want to call them, in Victoria, who are in opposition to what the government is doing around the extension of these emergency powers. They're in opposition to what the government is doing in terms of the way they are handling this thing that they are calling a crisis. These voices are really being pushed to the ground. They're being pushed to the ground, pushed underground even, by the government, their friends in the media, and by authorities, whether these are health authorities and, of course, police authorities. In Victoria in particular, and one of the focuses of this discussion is around the use of the police to, protect the political class, to protect their political message, and to enforce rules and regulations on people which not only deprive them of their freedom in everyday life, but their actual ability to have an opinion that is contrary to the one that is mandated as legitimate by those that rule them in the government. And they shouldn't be ruling us, but I'm using the word rule very deliberately, because that is what is happening. They are not representing us, they are not governing us, they are ruling over us like a ruling elite, like a dictator, like a king or a queen. We have become mere subjects to their every wish and command. Now I'm going to play some video from a protest that I attended on Tuesday night here in Victoria. This was a protest against what was happening in the Parliament House that day. So this is people from the community. Whether you agree with them or not doesn't matter, but these people had a significant point to make about what was going on within Parliament that day. So they were opposed to the extension of the emergency powers, which is their right, actually, to be opposed to that. And it is their right to go out there and protest and make their voices heard. So they are protesting. Now you have to understand that some of these activists, protesters, political people, whoever it is that are at these protests, they have also attempted to make submissions in the form of petitions. They have attempted to email their representatives, they have attempted to call them, attempted to contact them at their offices, whatever it is. Multiple attempts have been made. But we are in a situation where people who are elected to office, people who are governing over us, particularly in Victoria, are no longer interested in hearing the voices and opinions of those that they govern, those that have put them in that position, those that they should be representing. They're no longer interested in hearing their voices. It's no surprise that the Labour government votes along party lines in support of their Premier, Daniel Andrews, who is the spearhead of many of these kind of rules and regulations in Victoria. The Liberal government, they just don't have the numbers. Even though they're in opposition, they don't have the numbers. So we really come down to these people who are the crossbenchers. There's 3 of them in the upper house, and some people call them independents, crossbenchers, and I'll just refer to them as independents, in the sense that they're not really, there's no one else there from their party with them. They're there on their own terms, and they can really sway the direction of the vote, and they can ask for things that the opposition perhaps can't, because the votes of these crossbenchers and independents are really required to pass these type of laws. And I think on that night, it only passed, 18 to 19, so like by 1 vote, because of the influence of these crossbenchers. Now, these people, they're a great example of the type of people who are in government today, because, they are not beholden to the same party politics as, well, they shouldn't be anyway, as those in the Labour or Liberal government, the two major parties. They can really vote with their conscience. They can really vote and in a way that represents their constituents, in a way that represents the community, and particularly as they have had a lot of interaction with the community. So I've seen a lot of people reach out to them, whether it's via petitions, phone calls, emails. They reach out to them and they make arguments in support of, this is why we think they shouldn't be given this power, because, they've abused it in the past. Whatever it is, so many people have reached out to them. A lot of people have reached out to them, from your everyday person to people in certain professions who have a bit more insight into these laws and these rules. So we have doctors, lawyers, who have gone out of their way to provide submissions to these people. But they have chosen to ignore all of that, and they have chosen to look inwards into the Parliament itself and really take their directions from the ruling party, which is the Andrews Labour government. And worse, a lot of the decisions they are making, and they're basing their as their cover for making these decisions, is the advice that they receive from unelected people. So these are health bureaucrats, medical officials, and legal officials who are unelected by the people of this state. Now, you could make an argument that yes, they're doing their due diligence by talking to these people. Of course, they should be doing that. But a part of being in Parliament, a part of being a representative of the people, is also to take on board the requests, the demands, and the views of your constituents. And the inability to balance these two things, and their very trigger-happy acceptance of anything that those in Parliament or those unelected medical bureaucrats tell them, is concerning, because government, Parliament, these representatives should be balancing the desires and wishes of the community as well as that information they receive. But clearly it has not been occurring in Victoria, and definitely it has not been occurring in many other parts of the world. Maybe even your state or your country, you are seeing this happening to you. And it's very, 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 for me, it is a sign that we are in a state of emergency, because we need to correct this. We need to correct this in a way that these people know that there are consequences for the actions that they are taking. There are consequences for ignoring the voice of the people. And they might not see it on the streets yet, and they might not see it because there's no election around the corner. But, people have long memories. People will not forget these type of betrayals by these so-called independents and crossbenchers. People will definitely won't forget the betrayals by the ruling parties, of course. But right now, we know that these three particular members have a lot of power and a lot of sway, and then they have used that power and sway to benefit themselves, their parties, at the expense of the people of Victoria. And a lot of us won't forget that very quickly at all. But that takes me to another point, and that point is that even though those in Parliament with the ability to do something about what is happening have chosen not to, out of cowardice, out of fear, they have chosen not to share with the public the health advice, the medical advice, the legal advice, whatever advice that they're given to enact these rules that enforce so many draconian laws and regulations in our lives. They have chosen not to do those things. They have chosen not to argue on our behalf, to give us that information. We have people in the community, like these protesters that protested that night, that go out there to make their voices heard and to tell the community that here we are, a voice for you. We are here to talk, and we are here to discuss in this place at Parliament where the laws are being passed, our grievances with the government. And what happens in this situation is the government uses the police to put fear into these people so they don't turn up. And people still turn up, but what I'm saying is the government is actually actively using the police force to put fear into these people. And I witnessed it firsthand because I attended this protest on Tuesday. Now, nothing happened in terms of arrests or police violence this particular day. But you don't always need there to be violence. You don't always need to be an arrest to understand what is going on in terms of the abuse of power by the police and by the government. What I want to tell you is that I attended the Invasion Day rally, and on that day, there were almost 10,000 people in the streets of Melbourne during a time when the Chief Health Officer's directives was for gatherings no larger than of 100 people at a single event. Now, during my walk towards Parliament House at the Invasion Day protest, there were police on the streets, but it was a very welcoming atmosphere. And the police weren't checking anything. They were just there. They weren't talking to anyone. They were just kind of like, I guess, providing event security. And the reason I say providing event security was that when the event actually was about to kick off, police were actually helping the protest organizers usher in a truck that was the stage for the protest. So, they were actively participating in assisting the protesters breach the Chief Health Officer's directives, because again, it was a 100 limit on gatherings for any particular event, and these people were in their thousands at that march, not socially distancing and all this kind of nonsense that they put rules out for. But the police were assisting them happily, and they were sitting back and watching. And even though there was a police presence, there's no need to lie about that. There was a police presence that day, but the mood of the police was very different. And I actually questioned a police officer that day and asked him, why aren't you guys arresting anyone, or why aren't you enforcing the Chief Health Officer's direction? And that police officer said to me that, people are behaving themselves, so that's fine. So I'm guessing that's kind of the instructions they've been given, which is not to interact with people, just let it happen and just ensure it's a safe environment. Now, fast forward to Tuesday at the event I attended, you have to understand this is a very last minute protest that was organized. And as I was walking up to the protest, which was maybe half an hour before it was meant to start, there was already hundreds of police who had lined up around this small park, which is the size of maybe 2 basketball courts, who have already encircled the park, and that was just around the park itself. Now, what's with that? Like, why have the police encircled the park where, you know, a gathering is about to take place before it even, I guess, starts, because they're not even sure exactly who's going to come. They're not sure of any of these things, and it's a last minute thing, so they can't be expecting 10,000 people to rock up, let alone 1,000 people. And at the end of the day, actually, it was only about 100 and, you know, 100 plus a few others here and there that turned up to this event. So this overwhelming police presence before anyone even rocked up, you know, what was the point of that? And the more I think about it and the more I look back on my footage, it's very clear that this was an intimidation tactic. This is legitimately just to intimidate people who are even thinking about coming into this square. When I first turned up and there was no one else there but the police, even I was thinking, like, should I actually go into that square? Will I just get arrested for walking in there? Like, what message are they trying to send to the community? And, you know, my message that I felt like was, you know, no one's welcomed here. You're not welcomed here. Don't come to protest at Parliament House. Don't come to protest about these things, because we are ready for you. We are waiting for you. And if you come here, and if you as so much as even by a little bit break any of the rules that we can get you on, we will start arresting you. We will start using violence against you. We will start pepper spraying you, because this is not authorized by the government. This is not authorized by the police. And that's very problematic, because it was a very different attitude to the Invasion Day protest. It's a very different attitude to many other protests which have nothing to do with the government, which the government and the police seem to allow. And well, that's not the end of it, because after I saw that circle and after people came in and started talking, and I'll put some of the stuff that people were talking about at the end, so you can see that these are legitimate concerns that some of these people had. So I actually went around and, you know, filmed around the precinct as well, the Parliament precinct, because there's a few buildings attached to Parliament House where, you know, government work happens. And, you know, there was police all over the place. So I went around the back, and there was police sitting at the back of Parliament House. There was police along the path there. There was also, you know, mounted police on horses just waiting around. There was the tactical units. These are the guys that are dressed in, I guess, black or whatever, with the red badges here. And you know, they're there waiting, prepping, I guess, in case they have to come in and pepper spray people and drag them out, because these are normally the cops that are doing that type of thing. And then there was also police across another government building there. So hundreds of police here to protect the political elite, while they, inside the halls of government, are passing laws which further impede on the freedoms and the voice of the people. So it's a very kind of confronting thing to see, because you hear about these kind of police states and you watch it happening on TV in other countries, and you kind of see the remnants of it, the very beginnings of it kind of bubbling here in Victoria. And you know, it's happening, and the police higher up are well aware of what they're participating in, and that is, you know, the crushing of any type of sentiment that is not pro-government in the public square during this time, at least. You know, similarities, I guess, right now, if we look around the world, if we look at what's happening in Myanmar, where there was a coup, you know, you have the military junta there using the police and the military to quell political dissent, where people have very legitimate concerns. Now, we don't have that type of, you know, thank God we don't have that type of violence being used against the people here. Although I have seen, you know, in my time going to these protests to cover them, I have seen signs of, you know, very kind of brutal ability of the police to snap at any moment. And I don't think they see anything wrong with that as well, from the way that they've addressed it in public. But, you know, overseas in these countries, you see how the police is used by the state, by the military, or by dictatorships. You see how the police are being used against the people. And in many ways in Victoria as well, even though it's not as extreme, and it's a lot more subtle. The police are actually being used to protect the political elite against any sort of dissent from the mainstream message put out by the government. And that's very concerning. And you know, when I walked back to the square where the protest was happening and walked past all of these police, you know, I could see people on the other side of the road who are there to protest as well. I guess they're there to come and gather with these people and hear what they're saying. But they have, you know, they're standing across the road away from where this gathering is taking place. And I don't want to pass any judgment on that decision by those people not to come into the square, because it's a very confronting place. But it's very sad to see that happening, where people in this country, in Australia, in the West, are afraid to go to a meeting point near a government building that is a public place to voice their concern against the government. They're afraid that if they go into that square, they will be subject to arrest. They will be subject to abuse by the police. And it's very sad to see that happening in our state. For me, I never expected to actually be confronted with those kind of things where people are genuinely fearful of getting into the you know, the bad books with the government and with the police. So yeah, that's just my feelings on what I saw, on what I witnessed when I went to cover this protest. And I've been to many now over the past year and a bit, and I think it's not gotten any better. It's actually getting worse. And to think that we might potentially have 9 more months of this, where the police, government, none of them are accountable, because they themselves have unilaterally passed, you know, powers and bills or whatever it is to make it possible for them to continue this tyranny over those of us that are willing to question them, those of us that want to see more evidence, those of us who are not happy with what we are being told. And even though it's portrayed as a minority, I think it is a majority of people in Victoria who are legitimately concerned about these abuses. And perhaps the reason that you see less turnout at these events sometimes, you see people you know, a bit more fearful to engage in this kind of political debate in public, is because of this campaign of terror, I would say, and fear being perpetrated by our government and by the police authorities in this state. So that's it for me, guys, for this episode. I'm going to leave you with some videos from the protest of some of the speakers, so you can hear some of the things that they said. Thank you, and see you all next time.
Is it fair enough to say that we, the Australian people, are sick of being exploited by those people in Parliament under this so-called state of emergency?
But you're here because you want to make sure that they know that we made our voices clear and they ignored us, and we're going to remember it.
We must fight to maintain these freedoms from politicians who believe they know better than us.
Yep.
We're all unique individuals with unique dreams and goals.
Yep.
Nothing but a bunch of central planners. They can't make decisions for us.
Correct.
People like us with passion and conviction, it's completely priceless. You can't pay for that, which is why we're going to take their seats.
It is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong.